Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session on private sector leadership in crisis, advancing gender-responsive humanitarian action. My name is Killian Murphy. I work with the Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, ADPC, on research and private sector engagement, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. So this session is organized by the UN OCHA, UNDP Connecting Business Initiative, and UN Women with support from ADPC. This morning, we'll be exploring the important topics of how the private sector can navigate disaster and humanitarian contexts, apply gender transformative approaches, and increasingly step up as strategic partners in humanitarian action. So I'm joined by a wonderful panel today. I will be introducing them shortly, but firstly, please allow me to give a brief overview of today's agenda. So we will be moving into an interactive word cloud exercise shortly. Then we will be hearing from our panel through our interactive panel discussion. I will be opening the floor for questions and answers today from you, the audience. So as the session progresses, please have any questions in mind that you would like to direct to our panelists. And towards the end of the session, we will be reflecting on what we've heard, any key takeaways and important calls for actions in the context of this session and also today's forum overall. So to get us started, I would like to take us through a quick interactive word cloud exercise on Mentimeter. It should be beamed up on the screen shortly. Please scan the QR code. And this exercise, it's not just to make sure that all of us are awake and present in the room and that we've had our coffee, but it's also to capture the collective wisdom in the room on this topic. So the question should be coming up on the screen shortly if you scan the QR code. We would like to hear from you. Just ahead of hearing anything from any of our panelists or experts here in the room today, what is one thing that you think businesses could do differently tomorrow to make their crisis response more inclusive and impactful? So I will also take a moment to scan the QR code so I can see the responses coming in. So what is one thing that businesses could do differently tomorrow to make their crisis response more inclusive and impactful? I hope everyone's able to access the Mentimeter. Okay, wonderful, and I see a lot of responses coming in. It's great to see words such as inclusivity, partnership coming up, respect, diversity, and I noticed ideas such as collaboration and innovation being highlighted also. So I think today that's exactly the space that our panel will be taking us into once we hear from our panelists. So let me give a few more moments just to see the responses come in. Inclusive recruitment is there. We'll be touching on many different aspects of the topic today, both in terms of private sector engagement in humanitarian action, as well as the gender responsive aspects of this topic as well. So thank you very much. I think this has been a good catalyst for our discussion. I think they set the stage perfectly for today's conversation. Let us move into the panel section of this session today, and we are extremely fortunate to be joined by three remarkable leaders, each bringing unique perspectives from the field of disaster resilience, corporate strategy, and the UN. So please allow me to introduce today's panelists. Firstly, we are joined by Veronica Gabaldon. She is the Executive Director of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, PDRF. Veronica has been pivotal in the design, launch, and operation of the country's only private sector-led emergency operations center. Veronica has been instrumental in strengthening business preparedness and recovery coordination in the Philippines, and was recognized as a finalist for the 2022 Women's International Network WIN Disaster Risk Reduction Leadership Award. Next, we have Yasangi Randeni. She is the Group Chief Sustainability Officer and Assistant Vice President for Corporate Strategy and Sustainability at Aitken Spence in Sri Lanka. With nearly 2 decades of experience, Yasangi has embedded sustainability into corporate governance and strategy, introduced DRR frameworks, and actively contributed to regional dialogues on business and human rights. We are also delighted to be joined by Maria Holzberg, who is the Deputy Regional Director at the UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. She joined UN Women in 2019 after over a decade working in Asia on gender, humanitarian action, and disaster risk reduction with organizations such as Save the Children Sweden, ADPC, and the International Planned Parenthood Federation Humanitarian Hub. So together our panelists will be providing important perspectives on private sector innovation, corporate leadership, and UN engagement in humanitarian action. Please join me in a round of applause to welcome our panelists. So you've been hearing a lot from me so far. I think it's just about time for us to hear from our panelists. So to kick us off, let's turn to Veronica with some of the first panel discussion questions. We know a lot about PDRF. The Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation has pioneered private sector-led resilience. Veronica, could you tell us a bit about PDRF's work in ensuring that coordination from your business emergency operations center through to your preparedness activities with your partners also address gendered impacts and support local leadership? Thank you, Veron.
Thank you, Killian. And thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to be part of this forum. And thank you to our dear audience, both in person and online, for joining us this morning. I am honored to share insights from the work of our organization in advancing gender-responsive disaster risk reduction. But first, allow me to give you a context of where we are in terms of gender equality in DRR in our country. There has been significant strides in integrating gender considerations into our disaster management, as emphasized in our country's Philippine DRRM law, which was enacted in 2010. This law that we have today also explicitly mandate gender mainstreaming. We also have the Philippine National Disaster Risk Management Reduction and Management Plan for 2011 to 2028, which emphasizes women's active involvement in all phases of DRR. We have an active network of women organizations that play a crucial role in advocating for gender-sensitive disaster response. And oftentimes, our women leaders are invited to regional DRR forums to talk about our work in the country. At the local level, oftentimes you see women's active involvement, which has led to inclusive evacuation planning, and oftentimes also you see women leading preparedness activities and serving on disaster councils. And yet, despite these positive developments, the Philippines still face substantial challenges in fully harnessing women's leadership in DRR. In that context, we see the role of the private sector in advancing gender equality in DRR. PDRF, or Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, our organization is a nonprofit organization that focuses on DRR. And we have an extensive network of large businesses which we established in 2009. In 2018, we operated the world's first private sector-led emergency operations center, which monitors natural hazards in our country and serves as a platform for coordination during response. We work closely with the government and other stakeholders to provide augmentation and support locally led response efforts. We have integrated gender indicators into our EOC data collection and analysis, and we use this data to tailor response efforts by the private sector to address specific vulnerabilities. We have come a long way as far as the private sector is concerned. From the early days, which we have learned after Haiyan, of having inadequate or unequal distribution of resources, to a more efficient and coordinated response by the private sectors. And we learned all of this by becoming partners with other stakeholders in advocating for gender equality. One of the important partnership that we established is with the platform organized by ADPC, and we call ourselves the PhilPrep, or Philippine Preparedness Partnership, composed of the Office of Civil Defense for the government, the academe, the civil society, and the private sector. PDRF is also a founding member of Connecting Business Initiative, where we support private sector platform in 20 countries. And recently, we established the Camp Haraya, or it's quite a mouthful, but it is a youth camp that we established early this year, which means harnessing advocacy and resilience for the advancement of youth in action. So this camp empowers youth advocates with facilitating practical immersion and fostering interdisciplinary collaboration. So, as I mentioned, the Philippines has made valuable progress, demonstrated by the active participation and leadership of women, including the youth in DRR efforts. Yet, to truly realize their full potential, sustained efforts are needed to overcome societal norms, provide capacity building, improve data systems, and embed gender equality into the core of disaster resilience strategies. I'm excited to be learning from my co-panelists and the audience today other best practices that we can also use and embed in our practices back in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Veron, for those insights. I do have a few follow-up questions. I think you've told us some really good success stories about PDRF has been able to mobilize and engage the private sector, certainly in the aspect of emergency preparedness, but also in a lot of other aspects of humanitarian action. I know it's been a long road in terms of establishing the private sector-led EOC, so you may also want to give us some insights about some of the barriers and challenges that PDRF has been able to overcome in terms of this engagement of private sector, effective coordination, and how you were able to overcome some of these challenges. Thank you.
Yes. Well, as I mentioned, we have the laws that mainstream gender into our DRRM strategies and plans and programs. However, if you look at the community level, there is a lot of improvements that need to be done as far as implementing these plans are concerned. Oftentimes, you see efforts that are somewhat a token participation of women. We need to see them as leaders in their communities, but their participation at this time lacks the technical knowledge, lacks the technical capability, so that when they are called to decision making, that's the struggle that they are experiencing right now. So they are good in organizing and bringing people together, but at the strategic level and providing that voice in decision making, that's where we need to capacitate our local women leaders in the community. So the work of PDRF in that aspect is to bring that knowledge to our network, such that the member companies operating at the local level will have these opportunities to work with these women leaders in terms of social capacity as well as economic activities. We also provide guidance how they can harness the leadership of women, and how, with the innovation and resources from the private sector, they are able to help these women leaders, and not only the women leaders, but also the youth, and making sure that the vulnerable sectors also have a place in their program as far as engaging with the communities are concerned.
Thank you so much, Veron. I think through ADPC's engagement with PDRF in regional platforms, we often point to the Philippines and PDRF as one of the champions in terms of really engaging the private sector in different aspects of humanitarian work. We would like to move to a slightly different context now. We will hear experiences from Sri Lanka. So let me move the panel discussion and we can engage with Yasangi. So Yasangi, we were looking back at Sri Lanka's recent economic crisis, which was seen as a defining moment for businesses in crisis response. Companies stepped in to maintain essential services. Looking back, could we hear a bit from you about some of your insights on what you think enabled the private sector actors to respond quickly and inclusively? And you may also want to consider some of the impacts on women and marginalized groups. Could you tell us about how some of these lessons were able to inform future crisis preparedness? Yasangi, please.
Thank you, Kilian. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the short answer to that question is generosity and strategic interventions for resilience. Now, before I explain what I mean by that very short answer, let me give you a little bit of background to Aitken Spence PLC so that you understand the context of my answer. Aitken Spence is a diversified conglomerate in Sri Lanka. We have been around for 157 years, and we operate in many, many industries, including tourism, maritime and freight logistics, plantations, power generation, and many other services. And we have been signatories to the UN Global Compact since 2002. We have been signatories to the Women's Empowerment Principles since 2011, and there are many other networks that we engage with as well. But in the interest of this question, I will be picking examples mostly from the plantation segment of our company because it is a segment that is very heavy or very female focused. Overall in our group we have 40% female representation, and we recently just appointed the first ever female chairperson of the group. But in this particular segment, women still make up most of the workforce. So my examples will be from this particular segment. So now that I have given a little bit of background to Aitken Spence, let me elaborate on that very short answer I gave. So what I mean by generosity is that in terms of crisis, in terms of disasters, the private sector plays a key role in providing resources that need to be immediately mobilized. Sometimes the public sector doesn't have the means to release funds or release resources because of red tape, but this is where Sri Lankan private sector really rallies around to provide assistance in any way that they can. One company can't do everything, but every company can do different things in their own perspective. And even in the economic crisis, we saw many companies stepping up. Let me give an example from my own company. Like I said, I'm going to get examples from the plantation segment. So during the economic crisis, there was a shortage of resources, and we saw employees who were actually skipping their meals to save on their cost and save supplies as well. So the company actually decided to give midday meals free of charge to all employees. So we provide meals to close to about 4,000 employees in the plantation segment. And now, even if the economic situation has stabilized, we continue to provide this meal program at a cost of about $10,000 US, close to $10,000 US annually. And another thing we do is we get the family members of the plantation workers themselves to make the meal so that the resources are going back to the same community. Also, we allocated vacant lots in our estates to cultivate vegetables and fruits, and to date we have distributed over 5,000 kilograms of fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables, to the plantation community free of charge. Now, there are families with special needs children in the estate as well, and as an ongoing support, these families are given dry rations, and also there are a lot of other support systems that are given to the plantation community because, like I said, very female-focused workforce, and also vulnerable communities that need a lot of assistance. But now, let me bring you to that second point I made, strategic interventions. Because generosity alone is not enough. Generous efforts, short-term assistance cannot replace the contributions that strategic interventions can provide to make communities resilient. So we believe that our purpose is to help communities meaningfully, and I will explain what I mean by that in 3 examples. First, of course, is ensuring sustainable income for communities. Now, in Sri Lanka, we have seen many black swan events. We had, of course, the 2008 recession, we had the Easter attacks, we had COVID-19, then, of course, the economic crisis. But at Aitken Spence, we had zero retrenchments in all of those crises, because we believe that more than just providing charity, it's important for us to ensure that all our community members have sustainable income. And we also prioritized making on-time payments to our suppliers, because we have a very vast network of suppliers, because if we pay them on time, they can pay their own employees on time, so that we can make sure that the wider network is also able to maintain their income. And then, of course, local employment. 60% of our workforce is actually located outside Colombo and Gampaha districts, and these are the two districts that are the most developed in Sri Lanka. Like I said, over 40% of our workforce is female, and again, zero retrenchment. So this was very important for us as well. Now, the second point I want to highlight is on standard operating procedures to strengthen women's agency in communities. Of course, our DRR committees, our occupational health and safety committees all have equal representation, men and women, as well as cross-functional representation in all levels of workers as well. We make sure that we have female and male fire wardens, first aid officers, so on and so forth. And in our apparel segment, we made sure that there are counselors on site. Because as generous as we are, sometimes we can tend to be a little nosy as well. So we wanted to normalize having that support systems at work. We wanted to normalize seeing counselors at work, so that women will feel comfortable to go and seek assistance where they need it. Recently, in our corporate offices also and across the group, we enabled systems called Happy Mind, so that counseling services can be enabled both online and in person, so that women can have more access to those services. Now, I will take you back to our plantation segment to elaborate on another example. We have what we call cooperative society shops in all our estates, where goods and services can be bought at a subsidized cost. So it makes the essential supplies more affordable to these communities. Moving beyond that, recently we introduced a shopping card of sorts, which is like a credit card, and they are given incentives based on their attendance as well as their daily income to that card, so that they can present the card at the cooperative societies and buy the essential supplies they need with dignity and have that credit facility with them as well. Now, the third example I want to highlight is on infrastructure investment. While we talk about operational and structural changes, we also wanted to make sure that we strengthen infrastructure that can help them in a crisis as well, but more in a long term. Now, talking about climate change risks to communities, plantation community again is very vulnerable to climate change, and we had established, or we had invested in rainwater harvesting systems. 2023, Sri Lanka saw very severe droughts, but the plantation community had access to fresh water, both for cultivation and for domestic use, so the women didn't have to go out looking for water. Then I think you would have heard in Sri Lanka, we had a waste management crisis as well, and we had a terrible disaster many years ago, which took over 30 lives. So at Aitken Spence, we invested in a waste-to-energy power plant, which during the economic crisis, it was very difficult for us to sustain. Because of foreign exchange fluctuations that happened in the economic crisis, we were making losses in billions. But the company made an executive decision that we will maintain that power plant, because this power plant repurposes just around 200,000 metric tons of municipal solid waste from the Colombo district and the wider western province of Sri Lanka. Now imagine if we stopped that power plant, imagine 26,000 elephants walking all over half of the Bangkok metropolitan region. That is the amount of waste that we would have had piling up in the western province of Sri Lanka, and that would have been a big issue for the women in Sri Lanka, because they are expected to manage the household waste as well. So we made sure that those systems were strengthened. There's a lot more that I can talk about as well, but I think I've been talking for a long time. But essentially the key takeaway that I want to highlight is, generosity is very, very important, because public sector alone can't do everything. The private sector needs to step up and help the public sector with mobilizing the essential resources that they need. And B, generosity is important, but it cannot replace strategic interventions that can ensure long-term value creation. So while we build back better, we need to always focus on building better before as well, so that in times of a crisis, the communities can bounce back stronger and faster, hopefully. Killian?
Thank you so much, Yasangi. So these lessons from Sri Lanka, I think they do provide valuable insights into resilience under pressure. I also noted the emphasis on going beyond CSR or just generosity, but the move towards strategic interventions by the private sector. So before we move to our final panelist, I would just like to give a heads up to the audience that we will be opening the floor for questions. So if you have any questions in mind, you might like to prepare them now before we hear from Maria. But let us proceed with today's panel discussion, and we can move to some aspects on humanitarian responses and how they can be more inclusive. So Maria, we would really like to hear today about how can humanitarian responses better address the needs and priorities of women, girls, and marginalized groups? And if you could tell us a bit about some of the gaps that remain and how stakeholders, including the private sector, can contribute to more inclusive, gender-responsive interventions. Please, Maria.
Thank you so much, Killian, and thank you so much both Veronica and Yasangi for your excellent examples. And good morning or good day, colleagues and friends. I think the two examples that were shared here are critical illustrations. So I will just give a bit of a highlight on why it's critical to ensure that we have a humanitarian action that is gender responsive and built on inclusivity principles. You will know, and many of you I think are working in this sector, that women, girls, marginalized groups, people living with disability face heightened vulnerabilities in crisis context. And I will tie this to a private sector lens in a second. We know women take on increased unpaid care work, meaning when you are then working in a company, how do you balance those two components? Are you at risk of losing your job because you have to take on your unpaid care work? Therefore, the sustainability of your family goes down. Women are at higher risk of earlier child marriage. We know that that is one of the coping mechanisms that families are forced to do when there's many, many mouths to feed. And women in marginalized groups do face barriers in terms of accessing health services, livelihood, or education. So in terms of services, then there are examples of how those type of services can be provided in your workplace, okay? In the humanitarian space, we see that gender analysis is often not systematically integrated into humanitarian. But if you did integrate a gender analysis, you would pick up on the points that Yasangi talked about. You would note the specific vulnerabilities of the community, and you would understand what type of measures that would need to be put in place, which means we need to have this collaboration between women's groups, as you mentioned, Veronica, about their critical role in crisis as first responders, government in terms of understanding how the response services are provided, and private sector. So when you do a gender analysis, you pick up these pieces. It's very important. I want to just highlight that in the recent cuts to the humanitarian sector, it has severely impacted women-led organizations, and women-led organizations are critical service providers in crisis, but they're very small and they sometimes go under the radar in terms of these kind of bigger response. UN Women conducted a global survey across 44 crisis-affected contexts, and 90%, so put that in your brains, 90% of the women-led organizations reported being impacted by the reductions. And nearly half of them warned that they may shut down within 6 months. So the survey was done 6 months ago, so we're looking at the impacts now, if the funding levels persist, which no surprise to anyone, they do. So it's severely impacting these women's groups are severely underfunded, and they played this critical glue in terms of building the resilience of their communities. I'm going to share one or two examples of what UN Women is doing to bridge the gaps, but then also tie it to our a private sector lens. But one thing, and I think that would be important actually for us to explore more on, is UN Women together with through the Gender and Humanitarian Action Working Group, which is a working group entity in the humanitarian system, has established the We Respond database. I also want to acknowledge UNICEF as one of the organizations supporting the creation of this database. But it has 120 organizations across Asia and Pacific who are pre-vetted, quote unquote, to provide humanitarian services or response in a crisis context, which means that this myth of, oh, but there are no women's groups, or there are no groups available, they're nowhere, they don't know how to respond. They exist, maybe you're just not looking. So we have this database. It is, we can share a link afterwards, but it's a great twinning potential and it's targeted for all of the countries, most of the countries in the region. There are some that are not included, even though we have the data, but for security reasons they're not listed. But in most countries we have women's groups available to do twinning work with private sector in terms of response, but also in broader humanitarian response, as well as one critical role, which is the advocacy. And I know there are people in this audience that are critical advocates to put the issue of gender, social inclusion, disability inclusion at the forefront of all advocacy work. And I want to thank you in advance for the work that you do. So the other piece that UN Women has supported is the development of pre-crisis briefs. So you understand already what will happen in a crisis. I've been working on this for a long time. We all have, sitting here. Most of you in this room have been working on this. The talking point is unfortunately the same. Women and girls are disproportionately impacted by crisis. So we already know these things. So this is why we want to work on a pre-planning perspective, which is where the resilience component comes in. So we've developed these both for the Philippines and working also in Bangladesh and in Papua New Guinea, and we're working collectively with women's groups to develop these so that you're pre-positioned with the gender knowledge as you're rolling out your response work. From a private sector perspective, we work directly with women-led organizations, but we also use the framework from the UN Global Compact on Women's Empowerment Principles, and I will walk you through a little bit later on what that will look like. But we use these, and you basically have ticked most of the boxes in these. So it's actually a great illustration. I'm very grateful to come after your overview, because you really illustrated why it's important to have women's empowerment principles to guide policy and practice in business practice, because this allows your business to continue, but it also allows the response and your community where your business is operating to flourish, which means that you as a business is also expanding. But we will maybe go into that in a bit.
Thank you, Maria, for shedding light on a more structured approach to gender-responsive humanitarian action, and also for bringing the private sector lens into the conversation as well. Maria, you did mention tools that are available, such as the pre-crisis briefs, and in particular the Women's Empowerment Principles, WEPs, in your first response. But could you tell us a bit more about this framework at this point in the conversation, how this framework might be able to guide companies towards more impactful, gender transformative action in humanitarian crisis, and are there any opportunities for more private sector leadership in this regard?
Yes, there will be many opportunities for private sector leadership in this regard. And thank you for the follow-up. And so there's 7, the Women's Empowerment Principles, or WEPs. We do like our acronyms in this sector, but you have your own. So are 7 principles, and I won't go through them all at this moment, but I will say that one example of using a women's empowerment principle was actually mentioned by you on the allowing for bringing meal services into the workplace, providing specific additional support for caregivers of people living, or caregivers of children with disability. Another example, so addressing that unpaid care work component that is a crisis, that is starkly enhanced in a crisis. And you were also mentioning taking vacant lots to do own vegetable gardening, etc. Those type of pieces is allowing the workplace to continue, but actually facilitating for women working in the workplace to continue their engagement. So the principles look at advancing gender equality and women's empowerment in the workplace, in the marketplace, and in the communities. And so they're spanning the full value chain. And you also talked about this, the supply chain components. Are we working with women-owned businesses or women entrepreneurs when we are purchasing the relief items or when we are engaging in the supply chain? They were established 2010, so that's 15 years, 16 soon, and they were established by UN Women and the UN Global Compact, and we have 11,000 business leaders that are signatories across the spectrum of the type of businesses. So there's about 3,000 in Asia Pacific, a huge growth. And the reason there is a huge growth is that there are so many compelling reasons why you have to actually be a signatory, because it's good for your business, but it's good for your community as well. And the groups that have signed on in Asia are local branches of multinational companies. There's large national cooperatives. There's MSMEs, and as well as stock exchanges, business associations, and chambers of commerce. So again, we're trying to illustrate this supply, the wide supply chain perspective. This is a framework. So the WEPs are fully actionable to any type of business engagement. And it's basically a roadmap to integrate gender equality into policy and practice. And there's a whole range of resources and policy templates that can be used. So let's not reinvent anything. If you're excited about this, we have the tools for you. You can adapt them. There's also a transparency and accountability framework so that people don't sign up to this and then don't actually action. We do need to know that that the reason we're doing this is not for this corporate social, this charity perspective. It is because it actually makes sense for business, but it makes sense for advancing gender equality. You never gave us a time, I just realized, and I can continue, but I will be very quick in terms of just saying how we can look at what will be the kind of linkages here when it comes to the private sector lens and tying it into what the women's led organizations can be doing, because this is where you see that specific glue. You continue your business because you have set up these excellent and particularly in crisis, business continuity plans that are building in the gender equality principles, your business is thriving, but the community is thriving as well. And one way that you can ensure this is by working through and with your women's groups. I am going to stop at this stage because I've been talking a lot, but there's obviously so much more to say. I do think we should have a repository of the kind of good practices that have been advanced. I mean, we do already, but more structured, because the business perspectives that you raised they're not rocket science. It is because it's the greatest need in that, in the context that you were facing. So I will be quiet now.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you for the self-moderation of the timing as well. So, Maria, you did point out the WEPs and how they are a strong basis for a framework and pointing to opportunities for action. I also wanted to highlight the point that you made about the diversity and homogeneous nature of the private sector, because often in these kind of sessions we talk about private sector as one large group, but I think the point that you raised about needing to tailor tools and making tools applicable to the enterprises of different sizes is very valid here. So in the whole value chain, there will be smaller sized enterprises who are more closely embedded in the communities in which we work. There would also be larger companies who might be part of multinationals or conglomerates. There are other organizations such as business associations, chambers of commerce, so we can think about these different types of private sector organizations and how we tailor such frameworks and tools to be applicable to different stakeholders. At this point, we would like to open the floor out to the audience for any questions to our panelists. Please let us know if your question is directed to a particular panelist and introduce yourself with your name and your organization. Just one piece of housekeeping, I would request you to keep questions brief so that we can try to hear from as many voices as possible. And I see one question already here, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. Such a great panel. And I'm happy to see here a very gender kind of approach. Well, my question actually, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Lana, Article 19. Well, I mostly work on business and CSOs for the tech sector and ICT, but somehow that also relates to my question to Sri Lanka. So tea drop paradise, and thank you, Aitken Spencer, for showing Sri Lanka in terms of that it's not only about tea and beautiful beach and and wonderful people, but however, this tea drop paradise also has some shakes and sometimes a very monsoon weather in terms of human rights. My question is actually about grievance mechanisms of Aitken Spencer. So how effective is that mechanisms in addressing human rights violations reported by women? And how do you ensure accessibility to this mechanism, transparency, and especially protection against retaliation when it comes to women? And if you have more time to include also, how does Aitken Spencer engage with the state on promoting responsible business and human rights? Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question. Let me try and answer it as best as I can. I think the first question was on the effectiveness of grievance handling mechanisms. And I think the first and most important aspect that we have is an open door policy. Whether it's your own HOD or whether it's the community members or the key operator officers in the communities who work with them, there's an open door policy where anyone can come and talk to them with no fear of getting punished, so to speak, right? And we get a lot of advice on how we can make it more effective with the partnerships that we maintain. We are, like I said, we're signatories to the UN Global Compact, and I actually head the working group for business and human rights. So this is a constant conversation that we have on how we can make grievance mechanisms more effective. We do have a network of what we call HR partners, where if you're not comfortable to go to your HOD or the managing director of the company, these HR partners, who are mostly women, are executives in the workplace that you can go and directly talk to and voice your concerns with. And I mentioned in my previous example the counselors that we have on site. We have counselors in the apparel segment where any grievances that they have, whether it's a professional grievance or a personal grievance, they can go and talk to them. And like I said, we want to normalize that because we realize that when there is a nice office with the title saying counselor, people are a little afraid to go in there thinking, okay, everyone else in my flow is going to think I have an issue and that's why I'm going, and they don't want, it's not just about repercussions with the management, it's being seen as, oh, you have an issue with your peers as well. So normalizing those mechanisms is part of our ongoing efforts to make sure that the grievance mechanisms are effective as well. Then I will go back to the plantations community also. We have structured stakeholder engagement sessions where we talk to them, but also we have ongoing engagements with, especially with women. We have child development centers in our plantations where the children receive early education, but we also have educators who are from the local community who monitor the nutrition of the children in those CDCs. And that engagement is another platform where the parents of those children, especially the women, can come and talk to someone when they have issues, and those issues are escalated to the management. They monitor the nutrition and then they give advice on how to manage nutrition on a budget. But that conversation is again about normalizing having those dialogues with the organization, so that if there are any grievances, they are comfortable to come and talk to the officers of Aid Conspense, so to speak, and they have access to those systems as well. So I think in a nutshell, it's important to have normalized systems so that they know that this support system is there. And there are coordinated efforts that happen at head office as well to make sure that those engagements have happened. More often than not, what we get is, no, we haven't had significant grievances as such. But then we realize, okay, having no grievances doesn't mean you have perfect systems. It means that you need to do more to normalize it. You need to do more to make those systems even more available. You need to do more to ensure that employees are aware that even if it's like an insignificant issue, just go and talk to someone. Find someone that you're comfortable to talk to and talk to that person, but make sure it's someone that is trustworthy. We do have whistleblowing policies, external parties who are handling those systems. We have, like I said, the HR partners who coordinate directly with the CHRO and the top management. And also recently, I think I mentioned this in my previous example as well, we enabled a counseling service, completely transparent, completely independent of Aid Conspense employees, so that if you have an issue, you can go talk to them, primarily for your whatever emotional issues that you have, but that also acts as an engagement channel, so that if you want to speak to someone outside the company, those avenues are made available. I think the second question was on
engagement with the state regarding promotion of business and human rights principles in Sri Lanka.
Okay.
Thank you.
So this is where the partnerships and organizations like UN Global Compact play a huge role, because we are more comfortable to engage as a collective group rather than trying to address individual issues. And that is why the working groups of the UN Global Compact play a huge role in bringing many stakeholders together. We have working groups on gender, we have working groups on business and human rights, climate action. Recently, we started the working group on supply chains as well. And these networks bring a lot of stakeholders together. Aside from the UN Global Compact, we also have the Asia-Pacific Alliance for Disaster Management, which helps us to coordinate with a different segment of the public sector, which is the Disaster Management Center, the military. So whenever we need assistance at ground level, we immediately just call the Asia-Pacific Alliance for Disaster Management, or there's the Sri Lanka Preparedness Partnership, which is part of ADPC. So we maintain those networks so that we have one point of contact without trying to figure out, okay, do we go to the divisional secretariat, do we go to local government? So having those networks makes it easy for us to engage with the government. But of course, if there is a very pressing issue, we directly go to the government as well. That transparency is there. I hope I answered your question. I know it was a rather long answer.
Thank you so much, Yasangi, for those insights. Let me please check if there's any other questions from the floor. Please.
Hello. Good morning. My name is Riji. I come from Dubai and I work for the Middle East Center for Training and Development. I think that this was a very good panel, and a thank you to all those who are presenting today, especially Ms. Yasangi and Ms. Maria. I think Ms. Maria is like on top of all the topics right now, the inclusivity, the gender response and all of it. But my question would be actually on a private sector perspective rather, to Ms. Yasangi especially, like for all the collaborations that you have done, all the conversations that you have held with all the stakeholders, where would you find, could you at least cite some successful examples of collaboration between the CSO and companies which have a meaningful gender outcome? And a second question maybe too, where do you find that the companies actually go wrong when they claim that they are gender inclusive? Thank you.
So, like I said, we are a diversified conglomerate, so there are many examples that I can give, but let me now go to the tourism sector to give an example of a successful outcome of an engagement. So during the economic crisis, now at policy level, we do have local purchasing policies, so our companies are proactively looking to engage with local suppliers, especially because we have requested that they engage with suppliers within 35 to 40 kilometer radius of our operations outside the developed areas. Just to highlight on the example, I think you would see on the table over there, there's a reed by a local female entrepreneur. There was one, okay, this is, yes. So this bag is actually made by a local supplier. Thank you, Kilian. Right. So this was part of an engagement from our travel segment, that is the destination management segment. They were proactively looking to engage with local partners, and they found, through those engagements, they found this one lady who was making these reed bags, and they decided to purchase these bags from her because even in the community, they would rather have sustainable income than handouts. So this, they started buying those bags on a monthly basis, and now that one entrepreneur has expanded to 20 families. So on a monthly basis, we buy about 200 of these bags every month, 200 or more, and these bags are given as a souvenir to the guests who come to Sri Lanka, and the travel segment of Aitken Spence is actually the largest tour operator to Sri Lanka. So we are not just handing souvenirs from Sri Lanka, we are connecting local businesses with global networks. We believe that's a very successful outcome of a small effort to include local suppliers into our networks. Another example I can give is a partnership called the Can Market, which is a social entrepreneurship engagement where it's an organization that brings SMEs and smallholders, local artisans into a network where that network connects with businesses to give them avenues to make business. So in that partnership, we actually give our headquarters, our head office lobby for them to set up marketplaces every 3 or 4 months. So these, and they change the suppliers as well. We try to make sure as many of the suppliers are female-owned businesses to encourage female-owned businesses as well, because I think you would know in our region sometimes what happens is when it's a family-owned business, it's not owned by the woman. So we give that emphasis to make sure the female-owned businesses are given emphasis to encourage that as well. So every quarter we give that platform at Aitken Spence so that the foot traffic and the businesses that are part of our network can be accessible to those suppliers as well. And I think those are some examples of successful outcomes of engagements with communities. I think the next question was on something that would have gone wrong.
Where the companies have gone wrong when they're claiming to be gender inclusive. Gender inclusive,
okay. I wouldn't say going wrong per se, but like I said, we have a very strategic focus. So whenever the efforts seem to be more short-term and more charitable, we try to guide them to make sure that it's sustainable in the long term. Because giving, I mean, Sri Lanka is one of the most giving countries in the nation, in the world, we all know that, but giving can't be just about us getting our picture on the papers. So whenever any of our subsidiaries do projects where we feel like, okay, no, this is not the most sustainable way to make the best of the opportunity cost for the community, we guide them to make sure that it's sustainable strategically. So like the example I mentioned, we direct them to make it more sustainable for the community. If not Aitken Spence, find them other partners. So as much as possible, wherever we have charitable endeavors, whether it's community or environment. For example, okay, you know, if someone says, I want to plant 1 million trees, our question is, okay, how many, can you guarantee that all 1 million of those trees will actually grow? Because if the tree doesn't grow, there's no point in you wasting your money on planting 100 million trees or whatever, because it won't grow. If it doesn't grow, it's not going to absorb emissions. So like that, we engage with them to kind of guide them, but I wouldn't say they're going wrong. We just guide them to make sure it's sustainable. I hope I answered your question.
I see, thank you, Yasangi. I see, Maria, you would like to chime in at this point as well.
Yeah, just want to say, and also Veronica, you may have some examples. I love that you're asking where things have gone wrong, and I think that my dream is that we, on many levels, is that we would have like a conference of what went wrong or failures. And we're not, I mean, even the examples weren't really, we are shy to share when we don't do well. But one example I can share is I will not noble effort to provide dignity kits for diverse populations, and that is led through, now that has evolved significantly, so this is an old example, but the organization was so happy to be providing these dignity kits to diverse populations that they needed the documentation. They really wanted to show, so that you further victimize someone by forcing them to stand holding their dignity kit in front of a camera without a thought of a do no harm principle, etc. There's many examples like that, and it usually comes out during a crisis context, including, which what we've not talked about is cyber scams and charities that are not charities, etc. But that's not a concrete example. I wanted to say another way that an example from UN Women actually many years ago when COVID happened, where there was a program on textile, working with textile industry that shifted their production completely into making masks for response. So this was the humanitarian response that purchased the masks. This is early days. The world evolved after that. But that's an example of sort of agile thinking, both in the terms of the UN agency that had the program, but also the government to be able to procure the products locally. There's equally many examples of procurement not locally that did not go so well. So again, I want to, if anyone wants to fund a conference on failures, I'm happy to be part of that. Yeah, Veronica, maybe you have something also that you've...
Thank you, Maria, and very good examples, Yasangi. Thank you. You know, gender equality needs to be also pushed in terms of the private sector. We have a lot of resources and expertise that can also advocate for gender equality, and unfortunately, that's not the expertise. That's not mainstreamed yet in the private sector. So we partnered with UNHCR to support this advocacy and conduct learning exercises and learning sessions for the private sector, especially the conglomerates and the businesses within our network, to mainstream gender equality in their operations, particularly the PSEA policy, or the Prevention of Sexual Exploitation and Abuse policy, within their operations, and also applying it to their supply chain, the contractors and suppliers. No? So that's one thing that we work with the UNHCR to make sure that the private sector, the private companies have proper guidance as far as gender issues and embedding gender principles in the workplace and in their business operations. Another example is that in the Philippines, 99% of our economy is composed of the micro and small medium enterprises. And 60% of that, of the workforce, will be within that sector. And within the micro and small medium enterprises, these businesses or small businesses are led by women, about 60 or even higher, 60 or 70% will be women-led. And so what we did is to make sure that the business continuity planning of, they learn about business continuity planning. But, there's this perception that BCP is expensive and very complex for small businesses. So what PDRF did is to streamline it into 6 or 10 steps. We published several tools or toolkits available for free in our website. You can check that later, and you can download it for free. And we also published stories, success stories of women-led entrepreneurs, especially after COVID. As mentioned by Maria, how some of them, or how they have pivoted their businesses or their livelihood into something that will be relevant for fighting COVID or the pandemic. And all these women empowerment principles in the business practice, we use this as a leverage for our member companies to pivot or think of products and services that will respond to this very specialized need of this vulnerable sector. I can give you a few examples. Our member company, Into the Telecoms, created this school in a bag where all the academic materials and are within that bag, and teachers can actually conduct lessons even under a tree, so wherever they are. And this has been particularly useful when a siege happened in northern part of southern part of the Philippines. We also have with our water companies involved in providing technical expertise in water resource management. So we have a 4-year project with the Canadian company, Canadian Embassy, supporting this program. So the water resource management targets women leaders in those communities to become stewards in water resources. We also have the companies in the energy sector providing renewable energy, targeting women-led businesses in the community, so that when power is out, they are still able to conduct business. So definitely we need all these advocates in our network. That's why we work with Global Compact. A lot of our member companies are signatories of Global Compact as well. We work with UNHCR to make sure that learning sessions are conducted regularly to advocate and influence how businesses conduct their operations within the principles of within these humanitarian principles. So we are very happy to be part of this conversation, and we do have a lot of things to learn from. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Veron, and our other panelists for those insights. I'm conscious of the time as we move towards the end of the session, but before we move towards the closing, I would like to give our panelists a chance to give us one final key message that you would like to take away from this session. So if there's one key message that you'd like businesses or partners in this room to carry forward and act on, what would it be? So it could be one sentence, one word. Maria, I would ask you to give your snapshot first, if you're ready.
Thank you. I will just say that the women economic empowerment or women empowerment principles are a roadmap. And let's use what we have. It's also common sense. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Maria. So Yasangi, let us hear from you.
Thank you, Killian. So I think I would like to point out again what I said, build better before, so that the need to build back can be reduced. I think you would have heard this famous saying that, if you have to cut a tree, don't cut any trees, but I'm just saying, if you have to cut a tree, spend 80% of your time sharpening your tools. Response cannot begin when a disaster happens. Your response has to be planned and structured way before, with the voices of the people in those communities so that you can better structure those responses. And I mentioned that we have male and female representation in our fire wardens teams and our first aid officers. That happened because when we were doing the trainings, there were girls in the team who said, I don't want my CPR to be done by a boy. Then we realized, oh, this is something that we need to work on, and this happened many years ago. So start early so that if and when a disaster happens, you are more prepared to respond. So build better before so that the need to build back can be reduced.
And Veronica, last but not least, your message for us to take forward after this session.
Building resilience begins with including everyone, especially women and girls. And it is essential for survival. Gender equality in disaster response isn't optional. We need it to survive. And we need women leaders so that communities can recover faster and stronger. The private sector, we realize that we can be catalysts to mainstream gender perspectives throughout the disaster management cycle to ensure a more equitable, effective, and resilient response that benefits everyone, especially women and vulnerable groups. And PDRF would continue to work with the multi-stakeholder partnerships to advance gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, and thank you to all of our panelists. I think at this point I'd invite us all to give them a round of applause. And let us close out today's session with a call to action. So we've heard today that businesses can be central actors in crisis response. They are capable of shaping preparedness, recovery, and resilience initiatives. And I really think that the themes of coordination, inclusivity, accountability have come through strongly. So I think the call to action is quite clear. Businesses must embed these aspects of inclusivity and gender responsiveness into the heart of their crisis strategies. They need to work hand in hand with government, civil society, and humanitarian actors to put such strategies in place. In this regard, we've heard about some useful tools and frameworks. There are the Women's Empowerment Principles, WEPs, as well as platforms such as UNDP OCHA's Connecting Business Initiative, and even ADPC's I Prepare Business Facility, which act as platforms to support the private sector and as important entry points where like-minded organizations can connect and carry this agenda forward and indeed create repositories of knowledge-sharing materials for this subject. On behalf of OCHA, UNDP, UN Women, and ADPC, I would like to again thank Veronica, Yasangi, and Maria, and all of you in the audience for contributing to this important conversation. Thank you very much, and let's turn today's session into real action that puts the private sector at the center of inclusive, gender-responsive humanitarian response. That brings our session to a close. Thank you.